Chapter 14: Basic Elements of Individual Behavior in Organizations. The learning objectives of this chapter include an understanding of the nature of the individual organization relationship. We'll also see how personality and personality attributes affect behavior in organizations or employee behaviors. We'll also see how individual attitudes in organizations affect behavior and the basic perceptual processes and the role of attributions in organizations. Further on the learning objectives, we'll learn what the causes and consequences of stress in organizations are and how that can be managed. We'll also see what creativity is and the role of creativity in organizations and how workplace behaviors can actually influence organizational effectiveness. The psychological contract. Psychological contract relates to the overall set of expectations held by an individual or an employee of an organization with respect to what he or she will contribute to the organization and what the organization will provide he or she in return, right? So I'll give an example of how such a psychological contract played out personally for me when I came for the on-campus visit to actually get this job with Francis Marion University. So part of the on-campus visit, one of the what was on my schedule was to actually have a meeting with the president of Francis Marion University, and during that meeting, the president actually gave me kind of a rundown of what's been happening in Francis Marion University, what I'm actually expected to see on the job, right? What the environment provides, right? Just gave me kind of a synopsis of what it feels like to be a member of the Francis Marion University community. And in turn, he went ahead, or rather, he went ahead to ask me beyond what was contained on my resume, what exactly would I bring to bear to Francis Marion University? What is it about me that is not contained in my resume? So what I would like us to understand is that conversation or that discussion that actually went on between the president and myself was some form of psychological contract, in the sense that in his rundown of what's been happening in Francis Marion University and what I expect when I joined the Francis Marion University community, it was kind of telling me what my expectations of the organization should be. And when he went further to ask me what other things are my abilities or what I could bring to bear that is not or that are not contained on my resume, it was more or less trying to extract from me what the expectations of the organization should be about me, about what my contributions would be to the organization, if that makes sense, right? So that's kind of a psychological contract. So for instance, at the beginning of the class, during the introduction, when I basically put forward what my expectations for the class is or are, right? And in turn, sought from students what their expectations are, it was kind of establishing a psychological contract. So it was more of me conveying what my expectations of the class is or are, versus also the students conveying what their expectations from this class is or are, right? And you will find out that my expectations would include students putting in the effort to actually do the assignments, do the exams, and your expectations will also be that I grade you fairly and that you earn good grades in the class, if that makes sense. So that is some sort of psychological contracts being put in place. So there are elements of psychological contract, right? The individual part to the organization, which is the contribution of the employee to the organization, and that contribution is basically what the individual provides the organization, and this may come in form of the effort the individual puts towards their work or delivering their tasks, their skills that they bring to bear when they come on board the organization, right? What abilities they bring to bear, their time that they put forward towards delivering tasks or being at work, right? And their loyalty to the organization. This will be some forms of contributions an employee provides the organization. Now, there is also what the organization provides the employee, which comes in form of inducements, right? This is what the organization provides the individual or employee of the organization, and this may come in form of the pay, what the employee gets paid, or what benefits are provided to the employee of the organization, or it may come in form of job security, because that is some permanence of employment being offered to the employee. So one expectation I had when coming on board Francis Marion University is that by the time I got to my 5th year, I should get into the process of getting tenured, which is kind of job security or permanence of employment. Also, the individual may also expect that the organization provides them with some form of recognition. Recognition is also a form of inducement, whereby the employee is recognized for exceptional work, right? So here in Francis Marion University, you find out that there are teaching excellence rewards, there are research excellence rewards. Those are forms of inducements that actually motivate members of faculty towards being or towards excelling in the areas of teaching, as well as excelling in the areas of research, as the case may be. So the diagram on this slide basically is an illustration of the psychological contract, right? So one thing we should note is that companies or organizations must ensure that whatever contributions the employee makes towards the organization, that there's a balance between the contributions and the inducements, in the sense that they are getting they're getting sufficient value from the employee as much as they are providing the appropriate rewards that are commensurate for the value they are extracting from that employee. The person job fit. The person job fit refers to the extent to which the contributions that are made by an employee of an organization match the inducements that are offered by the organization. And you find out that every employee of an organization has specific or unique set of needs that they want to be fulfilled by virtue of being members of an organization. Also, there are also a set of job-related behaviors that are required of them to contribute to the organization, right? And the degree to which the organization can take advantage of those job-related behaviors and in turn fulfill the unique needs of their employees will actually determine the level of the person job fit, right? So here in Francis Marion University, you will find out that there is the likelihood, or it can be assumed, that there is a high degree of person job fit with regards to faculty members in Francis Marion University, because a lot of members of faculty actually spend many years of their career working for Francis Marion University, unlike what you find, the kind of mobility you find in the academia, where a lot of people move from schools to schools. You find out that a lot of professors here have actually spent very many years working for Francis Marion University. That may speak to the person job fit, and more or less you could relate that to maybe the employment meeting that happens with the president, because that sort of approach to recruitment actually provides an avenue for some form of psychological contract, right? So I feel personally that those psychological contracts that are established or that are provided for during the meeting with the president actually goes a long way towards providing a realistic job preview for the employee, in the sense that at the point such a person comes on board, they they already know what they expect from the organization, and what they expect actually matches what they see on ground, and that actually makes them stay for longer, if that makes sense, right? So one thing is that most often than not, a precise level of person job fit is not achieved, right? And this could happen due to a number of reasons. And those reasons would include maybe organizational selection procedures may be imperfect, right? Their recruitment process may be imperfect. That could actually result in having a poor person job fit and entail or provide for the employee leaving the organization earlier than usual, or maybe actually the organization firing the employee. Now, both people and organizations change, right? So, whatever attributes such a person had as an applicant, the person may actually change when they're on the job, and that would provide for some kind of misalignment with the person and the job, right? Or the organization in turn may change, meaning that whatever expectations the employee had of the organization prior to joining, which used to be, probably stop being, right? It could be due to change in leadership, right? Those could cause for organizational changes. Also, each individual employee is unique, right? So accurate assessments are usually difficult. So those are actually basis for some kind of misalignments between an employee and the job for which they are employed. The nature of individual differences. Now, individual differences relate to the personal attributes, right, that vary from one person to another, right? That causes for differences between individuals. And these attributes or these personal attributes, they may be physical, or these variations may be physical, right? They may be psychological, or they may be emotional, right? And you find out that these individual differences lead to differing behaviors among individuals. It causes for variations in whatever behaviors they express. So, in assessing individual differences, organizations must be sure to consider the situation or context in which those behaviors or the behavior occurs, right? To actually be able to assess for individual differences. Because you find out that those people or employees who are productive in one area may not actually be productive in all areas. Personality and individual behavior. Now, personality traits represent some of the most fundamental individual differences in organizations. Personality refers to the relatively stable set of psychological and behavioral attributes that distinguish one person from another. And managers in organizations should actually strive to understand basic personality attributes and the ways they can affect people's behavior in organizational situations. And they have to do this not to actually mention their perceptions of an attitude towards the organization, right? So, in doing this, managers are able to understand the perception and attitudes of employees towards the organization, right? If they understand the basic personality attributes and how these actually affect the behaviors of employees under them. We'll be looking at the big five personality traits, and this is a popular personality framework based on five key traits, right? Based on these big five personality traits, it stipulates or it prescribes that high performing individuals in organizations, they tend to be high on agreeableness, which is one of the personality traits, conscientiousness, openness, extraversion. These are four of the big five personality traits. So that high performing individuals are high on these four traits, and they are usually low on the fifth personality trait, which is called neuroticism, right? And what is conscientiousness all about, basically, which is like the second personality trait we'll be looking at. Conscientiousness is looking at the ability of employee or the individual in an organization to prioritize while multitasking. So it looks at the skill of being well organized while being faced with a lot of tasks on the job. So we'll be discussing the big five personality traits in details on this slide. The first, we'll be looking at agreeableness, and this is a person's ability to get along with others, right? We find out that people with a high level of agreeableness are relatively gentle people. They are cooperative, they are understanding people, and good natured in their dealings with others, right? Whereas those people that are lower on agreeableness, or that they are low on agreeableness, they are relatively more irritable, short tempered, and uncooperative toward people. Now, looking at conscientiousness, like we said in the previous slide, it's a person's ability to manage multiple tasks and still consistently meet deadlines, right? Now, looking at highly conscientious people tend to be careful people, responsible, organized, and self-disciplined, whereas employees that are low on conscientiousness are more disorganized, they're careless, and they're less self-disciplined, or they lack self-discipline. Now, looking at neuroticism, which is another personality trait found in individuals that can actually affect their behaviors. This is the extent to which a person experiences anxiety rather, and is poised, calm, resilient, and secure, right? So you find out that people who are relatively less neurotic will be poised, calm, secure, and those employees experience less anxiety and stress. Whereas people who are relatively more neurotic will be more excitable, insecure, and subject to extreme mood swings. Extraversion is a person's comfort level with relationships. Extroverts are sociable, talkative, and assertive, whereas people who are on the other side of the coin, who are called introverts, are less open to establishing new relationships. Openness is a person's rigidity of beliefs and range of interests. You find out that employees with a high level of openness are willing to listen to new ideas. They have a wider range of interests, and they tend to be curious and creative employees. Whereas those with lower levels of openness tend to be less receptive to new ideas, have fewer and narrower interests, and are less curious and creative. The diagram on this slide is basically an illustration of the Big Five model of personality, showing you the ranges, right? The highs and the lows with regards to the Big Five personalities, the one we already discussed earlier on. The Myers-Briggs framework. The Myers-Briggs type indicator utilizes a questionnaire to differentiate personalities on the dimensions of the Myers-Briggs framework. And this indicator is useful to determine the communication styles and interaction preferences of employees. However, this framework, its validity and reliability is put to question. Now, the Myers-Briggs type indicator actually assesses personalities along four key dimensions. And those dimensions will include, first, the extraversion versus introversion. You find out that extroverts get their energy from being around other people, whereas introverts need solitude to recharge their energy. The sensing versus intuition. The sensing type of people they prefer rather concrete things, whereas intuitive people prefer abstract concepts. Now, thinking versus feeling. Employees that are thinking base their decisions more on logic and reasoning, whereas employees that are feeling base their decisions more on feelings and emotions. Judging versus perceiving. People who are the judging type enjoy completing or finishing a task, whereas people who are perceiving enjoy the process and open-ended situations, if that makes sense. Other personality traits at work. Locus of control. This is the degree to which an individual believes that his or her behavior has a direct impact on the consequences of that behavior. Internal locus of control. This would be a situation where the individuals believe they are in control of their lives. They believe that the success, or rather their success or failure, results from their own behavior. Whereas external locus of control is a situation where individuals that express an external locus of control believe that external forces dictate what happens to them. They believe that their successes or failures result from fate, chance, luck, or the behavior of others. Further on other personality traits at work, we'll be looking at self-efficacy. This is an individual's belief about his or her capabilities to perform a task. Now, high self-efficacy individuals believe they can perform well, whereas low self-efficacy individuals doubt their ability to perform. Authoritarianism is the extent to which an individual believes that their power and status differences are appropriate within, or rather, this is a situation where individuals believe that power and status differences are appropriate within hierarchical social systems like organizations. So they basically believe that there should be some form of power and status structure within organizations, right? Rather than believing that there are no power structures or status structures within organizations. Now, a person who is highly authoritarian may accept directives or orders from someone with more authority or a superior purely because they believe the other person is the boss, right? Whereas a person who is not highly authoritarian is more likely to question things, express disagreement, or even refuse to carry out orders if they are, for some reason, objectionable. Lastly, on other personality traits at work, we'll be looking at Machiavellianism. And this is when the behavior of a person is directed, or the behavior of an employee is directed at gaining power and controlling the behavior of others. We find out that more Machiavellian individuals tend to be rational and non-emotional, and they may be willing to lie to attain their personal goals. They may put little weight on loyalty and friendship, and they also enjoy, or most likely enjoy, manipulating others' behaviors, right? Whereas less Machiavellian individuals are more emotional, they are less willing to lie to succeed, they value loyalty and friendship highly, and they get little personal pleasure from manipulating others. Self-esteem. This is the extent to which a person believes he or she is a worthwhile and deserving individual. Now, people with high self-esteem are more likely to seek high status jobs. They are more likely to be more confident in their abilities to achieve higher levels of performance, and they derive greater intrinsic satisfaction from their accomplishments. Whereas a person with low self-esteem may be more content to remain in a lower level job, be less confident of his or her ability, and focus more on extrinsic rewards. Risk propensity. This is the degree to which an individual is willing to take chances and make risky decisions. Right? We've talked about whether managers should actually whether you prefer making decisions under a state of risk or a state of uncertainty, right? Risk propensity is the manager's inclination towards taking on more risk, right? We find out that a manager with a high risk propensity might experiment with new ideas, gamble on new products, and be a catalyst for innovation. However, the same individual might also jeopardize the continued well-being of their organization if those risky decisions prove to be bad ones, right? Whereas a manager with a low risk propensity might lead to a stagnant and overly conservative organization, or help the organization successfully weather turbulent and unpredictable times by maintaining stability and calm. Emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is measured by the emotional quotient, which is the EQ. And this quotient is the extent, or the intelligence is the extent to which people are self aware, manage their emotions, motivate themselves, express empathy for others, and possess social skills. Now, there are dimensions of the emotional quotient, and they include the self awareness, right? You find out that even research suggests that people with high EQs may perform better than others, especially in jobs that require a high degree of interpersonal interaction or jobs that involve influencing or directing the work of others. Now, let's look at the dimensions of the emotional quotient, right? Looking at self awareness, this would be a person's capacity for being aware of how they are feeling or the ability to know how they feel, right? Now, managing emotions, this would be a person's ability to ensure that their feelings do not interfere with getting things accomplished. So their emotions don't get in the way of delivering their tasks on the job. Now, motivating oneself would be a person's ability to remain optimistic and to continue striving in the face of setbacks or challenges, right? Or barriers and failure. Empathy would be a person's ability to understand how others are feeling. Whereas having social skills will be a person's ability to get along with others and to establish positive relationships. So something I would love us, or like us rather, to actually capture in these dimensions of EQ, you'll find out that the first three dimensions basically look at one, balancing oneself before having to reach out or have feelings towards others, right? In balancing of oneself, one becomes self-aware, one is able to manage their emotions, one is able to motivate oneself rather, before one now extends such balance or such emotional intelligence to others by being empathetic towards others or having social skills to be able to get along with others. Attitudes and individual behavior. Attitudes are complexes of beliefs and feelings that people have about specific ideas, situations, or other people. Cognitive dissonance. This happens when an individual experiences conflict among the components of his or her own attitudes. That's basically when an individual has conflicting attitudes. An example of cognitive dissonance would be when an employee says, I really wanted that promotion, but it went to someone else. I know I should continue to work hard to get the next promotion, but I really don't want to work for that person. So, in this situation, the employee wants the promotion, right? But in as much as they want the promotion, they're having a conflicting attitude, which is that they don't want to work hard because ordinarily to get promoted or to earn a promotion, one has to work hard for that promotion, right? But in this case, there's cognitive dissonance because this employee wants the promotion but doesn't want to work hard because they believe that even if in the event they worked hard for the promotion, they wouldn't earn the promotion, right? So there's cognitive dissonance here because the employee wants the promotion but isn't working hard for the promotion. Now, the employee as well has the belief that even in a situation where they worked hard for the promotion, they wouldn't even earn a promotion. But the ordinary circumstance would be that someone who works hard for a promotion would earn a promotion. So that would be a case of cognitive dissonance. Further on attitudes and individual behavior. Attitudes generally have three components: the affective, the cognitive, and the intentional components. The affective component of attitude. This reflects feelings, emotions an individual has toward a situation. Basically, the affective component of attitude refers to how an individual feels, how we feel. Now, the cognitive component of attitude is derived from knowledge an individual has about a situation. So it's basically all about the knowledge, right? Cognition refers to knowledge, right? People feel why we feel that way. We feel it's referring to why an individual probably expresses a particular behavior based off the knowledge they have about that particular situation. They are quite informed and about that situation. So that affects why how or why they feel in a particular way with regards to that situation, right? Or having a particular attitude in when faced with such a situation because of the knowledge they have. Now, there's the intentional component of attitude, which basically reflects how an individual expects to behave toward or in a particular situation, right? So the intention of behavior, right? How we intend to behave, that is basically about deliberation, right? Like when you say someone is doing something deliberately, it's intentional. So that attitude is being expressed based off an intention, right? A pre conceived intention to behave in that particular way or to express that particular attitude. That's the intentional component of attitude. Work related attitudes, job satisfaction, and work behaviors. Now, there's research out there that indicates that personal factors such as individuals' needs and aspirations all determine or actually contribute towards job satisfaction or dissatisfaction. And also, group and organizational factors impact job satisfaction as well. And such organizational factors may be things like what the working conditions of the work environment are like, right? The working atmosphere, how conducive it is, and what's the compensation, what the compensation is like, right? Those will actually impact job satisfaction as well. And something we would want to note is that satisfied employees are usually less often absent from work, right? And satisfied employees make positive contributions towards the organizational outcomes, and most often than not, they stay with the organization, right? Whereas the satisfied employees are absent from work more often, they may experience stress and disrupt co-workers as well, right? And are continually looking for another job. More or less, they are less likely to stay with the organization. Further on work related attitudes, job satisfaction or dissatisfaction. Now, this would be an attitude that reflects the extent to which an individual is gratified by or fulfilled in his or her work. In the event that the individual is actually fulfilled in their job role, then they are satisfied, right? Whereas the reverse, when it's the case, that would be a case of dissatisfaction. Now, in job satisfaction and work behaviors, we'll find out that high levels of job satisfaction do not necessarily lead to high job performance, right? Those two, it doesn't really mean that when an employee is satisfied on their job that they would actually deliver on exceptional or outstanding outcomes. That's not usually the case. Organizational commitment and engagement. Organizational commitment is an attitude that reflects an employee's identification with and attachment to the organization itself. We find out that a person or an employee with a high level of commitment, such an employee is likely to see himself or herself as a true member of the organization. And that person would overlook minor sources of dissatisfaction with the organization, right? And more often than not, they will see themselves remaining as a member of the organization in the long term, right? Looking at organizational commitment and work behaviors, right? Employee commitment strengthens with an individual's age. More often than not, research out there suggests that commitment actually stretches with individuals' age, right? Because you find out that with individuals' age, most often than not, the individual may have accumulated more retirement benefits with the organization, right? Because they've stayed longer with the organization. Therefore, they are more likely to remain with the organization because of the benefits of retirement, or rather, the retirement benefits that come with having stayed long with the organization, right? And like in Nigeria, where I come from, unlike the United States, where there is a law or a regulation that actually forbids discrimination based on age, right? But in Nigeria, to get fresh employment at an older age is quite challenging or rare, right? There are regulations that allow for organizations to actually not employ older people. So you find out that an individual's age, because of fresh employment age, right, would actually make an older person to remain committed with the organization. Now, years with the organization, right, because we find out that when an employee has spent longer time with an organization, more often than not, they may have acquired the organization's specific capabilities. Right, like let's say when I used to work in the industry, right, in the telecom industry, because I used to work for a regulator in the telecom industry, you find out that apart from generic knowledge that one could acquire during skill or knowledge acquisition, right, most likely, most often than not, employees of the organization I worked for gathered knowledge or acquired capabilities that are more telecom related, right? So you find out that when someone spends longer time with an organization, they are more likely to have that organization's specific capabilities, which makes them less attractive to another organization, if that makes sense, right? Unless they are more used to developing generic capabilities. Now, also another thing that would impact organizational commitment, right, would be when the employee has a sense of job security, right? So if an employee, for instance, is, let's say, in Francis Marion University, for instance, a permanent employee, a permanent faculty member, someone who has gained tenure, they are more likely to stay with Francis Marion University or be committed to Francis Marion University, because when they foresee that getting to another academic institution, that they would have to spend time to actually get job security or gain tenure, then they are more likely to stay with Francis Marion University where they've gained job security, if that makes sense, right? Also, another thing that impacts employee commitment to an organization positively would be if such an employee is involved in decision making, right? Once they participate in decision making, such an employee would feel valued by that organization, right? They will feel that such an organization values their input so much, and that sense of recognition would actually most often than not impact an employee to be more committed to an organization. So you find out that committed employees have highly reliable habits, they plan a longer tenure with the organization, and they muster more effort in performance. So they are more likely to actually express discretionary effort, whereby they put in more effort than usual towards delivering on their tasks. Affect and mood in organizations. Positive affectivity. This is a tendency to be relatively upbeat and optimistic, right? When an employee has an overall sense of well being and see things in a positive light and seem to be in a good mood, right? Such an individual would be said to have positive affectivity. Whereas the flip side would be negative affectivity, and this is the tendency of an individual to be generally downbeat and pessimistic when they tend to see, or rather, when someone tends to see things in a negative way and seem to be in a bad mood. Basic perception process. Perception is the set of processes by which an individual becomes aware of and interprets information about the environment. Selective perception would be the process of screening out information that we are uncomfortable with or that contradicts our beliefs, right? So we find out that most often than not, managers in an organization actually practice selective perception during decision making because they actually sieve the information out of the load of information that they are usually overloaded with during decision making. They sift through those information to pick what they believe or they consider is relevant towards the decision making or towards that particular work situation, right? If selective perception causes someone to ignore important information or causes the manager to actually leave off important information during decision making, then it can become quite detrimental. Further on basic perception process, stereotyping. This is the process of categorizing or labeling people on the basis of a single attribute, right? Where you are generalizing or attributing a behavior to a group of people or to a population. Stereotyping may cost an organization valuable talent, right? Whereby they probably say, let's say for instance, if they say all Nigerians, because I'm Nigerian, let's say all Nigerians have poor work ethic, right? And assuming I am a Nigerian who has very good work ethic, who has all the relevant skills, all the relevant capabilities an organization requires to actually fill a job position, right? And on the basis of stereotype, the recruitment managers say, oh no, this candidate will have a poor work ethic because all based on stereotype for Nigerians or a population of Nigerians, right? That would be the organization actually leaving off a valuable talent or that in me that possesses the capabilities they require just because of the stereotype that I would have a poor work ethic, whereas in the true sense of it, I probably have a good work ethic as an attribute, right? So you find out that stereotyping will violate federal anti-bias laws and stereotyping would be considered unethical. The diagram on this slide illustrates the perceptual processes of selective perception and stereotyping. So you can see for the selective perception where you have the positives and the negatives, right, represented here. With selective perception, let's say a manager that practices selective perception, they sieve out all the negative information that are not relevant in a decision making situation or a decision making process, leaving off only the positives, right? Whereby selective perception makes them screen out all the negatives and feeds them only the positive, right? That's a perceptual process. Now, for the stereotyping, you can see the green circles and the orange circles. Now, stereotype is basically arranging everybody that has the same attribute as one, categorizing or labeling them as one, whereby the green circles are categorized as one set of people, right, having the same attributes, and the red circle, or rather orange circles, are categorized as one set of people or population, labeling them all as one and having them filed up as one. Perception and attribution. Attribution is the process of categorizing or labeling people on the basis of a single attribute. You may consider attribution as a mechanism through which we observe behavior and then tend to attribute causes to that behavior, right? Attribution occurs as a result of three factors basically. The first being consensus. Now, consensus has to do with, do other people in the same situation behave the same way? So consensus occurs when other people basically in the same situation behave the same way, right? So that would be a consensus when, like, say, a manager believes one subordinate isn't very responsive or very, very open towards them, right? Whereas all the subordinates aren't open towards the manager, maybe because of some behavior of the manager. So there's some kind of consensus among the subordinates, right? Because in relation to or with respect to their relationship with the manager, they are not open. So there's a consensus among the subordinates, given that they behave the same way in that situation, right? Now, another factor that basically impacts attribution would be consistency, which refers to, does this person behave the same way at different times? So consistency basically occurs when the same person behaves the same way at different times. Now, another factor that impacts attribution, right, would be distinctiveness. This is, does this person behave the same way in other situations? So distinctiveness basically occurs when the same person behaves in the same way in other situations. Stress and individual behavior. Now, stress is an individual's response to a strong stimulus, which is called a stressor. And you find out that stress generally follows a cycle referred to as the general adaptation syndrome, or GAS for short. Right? Now, the general cycle of the stress process, it starts with the stage one called the alarm. In the alarm, you find out that individuals feel panic, wonder how to cope, and they feel helpless, right? This period tends to be relatively brief. So let's say, for instance, a student who leaves off their assignment until the last minute when it's due, right? You find out that, let's say, a day or on the very day that the assignment is due and this student is trying to actually get this assignment done, they will feel some sort of panic because they may be overwhelmed by the number of questions they may have to get done with to get it submitted by the due date, right? They will be wondering, how do they cope with answering all those questions contained in the assignment. At some point they may be feeling helpless because of the enormity of the job they have to get done to get it submitted on that due date, right? So that is the first stage, which is alarm, when they feel panic or when an individual feels panic, for instance. Now, the second stage will be the resistance stage, whereby the individual tries to confront and attempt to control the stress circumstances, right? They are actively resisting the effects of the stressor. Now, if the individual is successful at this stage, then the third stage, which is the exhaustion stage, is not reached. Whereby, let's say, for this student who is trying to meet up with the requirements of an assignment, right? If they are able to get it done by that due date, right? They are able to have the stamina to go through the process, the challenging questions contained in that assignment, and having to get it done within the time frame that it's early enough to get it submitted by the due date, then that individual has been able to effectively resist that stressor or that stress situation. In which case they don't get into the third stage called the exhaustion stage, right? So the exhaustion stage, the individual literally gives up and can no longer resist the stressor. This is basically a prolonged exposure to stress which causes the individual to give up. So you find out that in some situations, let's say the situation of the student that gets overwhelmed by the assignment on the particular due date, most often than not, when they get overwhelmed and they tend to get into the third stage of exhaustion, that leads them to not actually submitting that assignment by that due date, because they see that their stamina or their capabilities are unable to help them get done with the assignment to be able to submit it by that due date. So at the end of the day, that stressor, which is their inability to get done with the number of questions contained in that assignment and get it submitted by that due date, that thing gets them exhausted and gets them overwhelmed in such a manner that they are unable to submit it entirely, and they may not even be able, or such a student may not even be able to submit it over a period of time. So the diagram on this slide illustrates the general adaptation syndrome that we talked about in the previous slide, right? And something I would like us to note is that it's not all situations of stress that is negative, right? There are positive situations to stress, right? Stress can be used as a motivator, right? You find out that in fact a good type of stress is what you call the eustress, because stress can actually be a motivator, right? Or a stressful situation can be a motivating situation. Stress can improve cognitive function, it can enhance resilience, it can actually improve problem solving skills of an individual, it can promote personal growth, it can promote self improvement, it can actually strengthen relationships. So it's not in all situations that stress is a negative thing. Sometimes it's positive, and good stress or positive stress may be referred to as eustress. Stress and individual behavior. We'll be looking at personality types, and you have the type A personality, right? And type A people are extremely competitive, they are devoted to their work, they have a strong sense of time urgency, right? Also, type A people have a lot of drive and want to accomplish as much as possible as quickly as possible as well. Now you have the type B personality too, that are less competitive people, they are less devoted to work, and they have a weaker sense of time urgency. Causes of work stress. So we find out that the diagram here on this slide illustrates the causes of work stress, and you find out that it contains the organizational stressors. So work related stressors or organizational stressors basically fall into one of four categories, right? The first will be the task demands, and task demands that are stressors actually are associated with the task itself, right? And they relate to things like quick decisions, incomplete information for, and quick decisions will relate to maybe unavailability of time for consultation to actually make the decisions, right? So when managers are faced with on the spot decisions whereby they may not have the length and breadth of the information, and they may not have time for consultation as well. So tax demands also would include things like incomplete information for decision making, right? And critical decisions too. Those will be things that may cause for stress within an organization. Now, another work related stressor will be the physical demands, right? These are stressors that are associated with the job setting. So like what's the temperature of the work environment, like extreme temperature, is it very cold for individuals or employees of the organization working in that environment, or is it very hot, right? Or poorly designed office spaces, right? Depending on what kind of employees or what kind of organization or what kind of office layout the organization actually promotes, right? It may be physically demanding for their employees, right? Because of, let's say, people who are introverts, for instance, who like working solo. Open plan offices may actually be stressful for them, right? Causing for physical demands on the employees, right? Now, if the work environment is unsafe too, it may cause for threat to the health of their employees. So these are things that may be stressful or cause for stress in work environment. Now, another work related stressor would be role demands, right? These are stressors that are associated with expected behaviors with a position in a group or organization that can actually cause for stress, right? What are the behaviors that are associated with a position in a group or in an organization that can cause for stress? And these role demands would include role conflict, right? When an employee, maybe their values or their beliefs are in conflict with the expectations of their jobs, right? For instance, someone who is very religious, whose job role requires them to actually lobby on behalf of the organization, and belief actually is against lobbying. Their belief may probably see lobbying as bribe and unethical, right? So that would be like role conflict and causing for stress for such an employee that is saddled with such responsibilities. Now, role ambiguity too may cause for stress when it's unclear what the expectations of that job position is, right? Causing for role ambiguity, that may be stressful. That can cause for stress to an employee who occupies that position or job role. Another work related stressor would be interpersonal demands. Now, interpersonal demands will be stressors that are associated with relationships that confront people in organizations, right? What are the group pressures in the department or group or business unit the employee finds themselves? What are the pressures emanating from such groups, right? What is the leadership style that exists within the organization, right? What are the conflicting personalities that exist? Causes and consequences of stress. Moderate stress may have positive consequences, but too much stress creates negative consequences. Now, the negative consequences of stress may be behavioral, they may be psychological, or they may be medical, right? Now, behaviorally, stress may lead to detrimental or harmful actions such as smoking, alcoholism, overeating, drug abuse, accident proneness, and even violence, right? Whereas psychologically, the consequences of stress may include sleep disturbances, depression, family problems, and sexual dysfunction. Now, the medical consequences of stress may include heart disease, stroke, backaches, headaches, ulcers, and even skin conditions. Now, a negative consequence of stress for organizations or businesses, right, would be burnout, right? So that is work related stress. It will lead to burnout. Now, poor quality of the work output and even lower productivity, right? Another negative work related consequence of stress would be job dissatisfaction, low morale, even lack of commitment, or even a total withdrawal and absenteeism from work. Going forward on the causes and consequences of stress. Burnout. Burnout is a feeling of exhaustion that may develop when someone experiences too much stress for an extended period of time. Managing stress. Individuals manage stress through exercise, relaxation, improved time management, and support groups. Now, regular exercise, this reduces tension and stress and improves self confidence and feelings of optimism. Relaxation actually allows individuals to adapt and deal with their stress. Time management reduces stress by prioritizing activities to accomplish them in their order of importance. So, when we recall our example about a student who is trying to get the assignment done on the due date, right? And how that could actually cause them stress, right? So, if they managed their time better, that would actually reduce stress because it will help them get the assignment done in bits. So on the very day that it is due, it wouldn't be so much work they have to get done that overwhelms them. Now, support groups socializing away from work actually reduces stress, right? So another thing is that organizations can help employees cope with stress through sending them on seminars and workshops, right, where they can develop maybe time management skills, right, that would help them manage their stress better. They can actually send them on these seminars or workshops to gain knowledge on wellness, on stress management, on health promotion, and they can actually invest in health promotion, right, or even fitness programs to help employees manage their stress better. The creative individual. Creativity is the ability of an individual to generate new ideas or to conceive of new perspectives on existing ideas. The common attributes of creative individuals generally fall into three categories. And the first would be their background experiences, right? Personal traits and cognitive abilities. Now, background experiences and creativity. We find out that creative individuals were often raised in an environment in which creativity was nurtured, right? Now, on personality traits and creativity, individuals who are open, attracted to complexity, energetic, independent, and self-confident, they tend to be more creative, right? Now, cognitive abilities and creativity. We find out that an individual's power to think intelligently and to analyze situations and data effectively can result in greater creativity, right? Whereby you see that creative people are very skilled at divergent and convergent thinking, right? Divergent thinking basically is a skill that allows people to see the differences among situations, phenomena, or events, whereas convergent thinking would be a skill that actually allows people to see the similarities among situations, phenomena, or events. The creative process. Now, the individual creativity or creative activity tends to progress through a series of four stages. Now, the four stages would include the preparation, the incubation, the insight, and the verification, right? Now, the preparation would include formal education and training, right? Which is both are used to get the individual up to speed. Also, experiences on the job, or what you call on the job experiences, provide additional knowledge and ideas, right? So during preparation, the process begins through formal education, training, and on the job experience. Now you have the incubation, which is a period of conscious concentration during which knowledge and ideas mature and develop. Now, incubation is also helped by pauses in rational thought, right? This is a period of less intense conscious concentration during which the knowledge and ideas acquired during preparation, they actually mature and develop. So in quote, you may call this sleep on it, right? Sleep on it often refers to the incubation process. Further on the creative process, insight. This is a spontaneous breakthrough in which the creative person achieves a new understanding of some problem or situation, what you may call the aha moment, right? Patterns of thought coalesce into a new understanding. Now, insight may occur suddenly or develop slowly over time. It can be triggered by some external event such as a new experience or an encounter with new data, right? Which forces the individual to think about old issues and problems in new ways. Or it can be a completely internal event in which patterns of thought finally coalesce in ways that generalize new understanding. Verification. Verification determines the validity or truthfulness of the insight. Now, during verification, tests are conducted and prototypes are built to see if the insight actually leads to the expected results. Now, verification, for many creative ideas, you find out that verification includes scientific experiments to determine whether the insight actually leads to the results that are expected, like we said, right? Verification may also include the development of a product or service prototype, like we said, which is one product or a very small number of products built just to see if the ideas behind that new product actually works. Enhancing creativity in organizations. Managers who want to enhance and promote creativity can do so by making it a part of the organization's culture, often through explicit goals, right? So you make it part of the organization's culture, you set goals for revenues from the creative products and services. That way, employees would be motivated towards creativity, right? Now, another important way of enhancing creativity is to reward creative successes, right? While being careful not to punish creative failures. So, in the event that you're actually encouraging employees to be very creative and you're rewarding creativity, right? There should also be room for failures in the process of creativity by employees. Employees may fail in that process, and in so doing, to ensure that employees remain encouraged towards creativity, it behoves on the manager or the organization not to punish failures during creativity. So some ideas would work as expected while others may not work. Performance behaviors, workplace behavior. This is a pattern of action by the members of an organization that directly or indirectly influences the organizational effectiveness. And performance behavior refers to the total set of work-related behaviors that an organization expects an individual to display. So you find out that for some jobs, the performance behaviors can be narrowly defined and easily measured, whereas for other jobs, performance behaviors are more diverse and much more difficult to assess rather. Withdrawal behaviors. Now, withdrawal behaviors include absenteeism and turnover. Absenteeism is when an individual does not show up for work. Now, this the cause may be legitimate why they didn't show up for work, right? For instance, due to illness, jury duty, death in family, and so forth, right? Or the cause for not showing up for work may be feigned, right? But reported as legitimate, right? But actually just an excuse for that employee to stay home, right? Also, it may be a symptom, absenteeism may be a symptom of other work related problems. Now, turnover is when people quit their jobs. Turnover seems to result from a number of factors, including aspects of the job, the organization, the individual, the labor market, and family influences, right? It may be due to work related or personal reasons. A poor person job fit is also a likely cause of turnover. Organizational citizenship. This is the behavior of individuals that makes a positive overall contribution to the organization. Typically, these behaviors are directed more at helping others or facilitating achievement of goals through indirect means rather than performance of job related tasks. The determinants of organizational citizenship, they would include the individual's personality, attitudes, and needs, the social context of the workplace, right? What are the dynamics of the work group, right? Now, the organization's capability to reward citizenship also would impact organizational citizenship. Dysfunctional behaviors. Dysfunctional behaviors are those behaviors that detract from rather than contribute towards organizational performance. And those behaviors would include absenteeism and turnover, theft and sabotage, sexual and racial harassment, politicized behavior, intentionally misleading others, spreading malicious rumors, and workplace violence.